since I was a little girl, my mom has always asked me a very important question. Serena, what do you want to be when you grow up? And even though I was 5 and barely potty trained, I knew that I wanted to do something meaningful, something that saved lives. Sorry, Mom, it wasn't a doctor or a lawyer. No, I wanted to be a superhero. I mean, I had the whole thing planned out. My name would be Super Serena, and I could change my veggies into candy. But now that I'm 17, I might need a little more mature of a superpower, so I read a couple comic books. And I realized that superheroes were so much more than just their superpowers. Rather, they take their powers and abilities to help others and build a better community. So first, let's put on our capes as we fly through the history of superheroes. Then, let's squeeze into our unitards and tights as we expose the positive and negative influence of these iconic figures. Before finally, taking on our secret identity as we discover our own superpower. Art reflects history, especially if current times calls for something a little more positive to look up to. During the Great Depression, this came in the form of the first superhero. Jewish immigrants Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster took their comic book reading dreams and created, it's a bird, it's a plane, no, it's just Superman. One day, Siegel had a dream of a character similar to Hercules. His friend Joe Shuster sketched the first image of Superman. And being a devoted bodybuilder, he depicted him as a defined, muscular man, dressed in the typical bodybuilding attire, a unitard and tights, thus creating the archetypical superhero costume. Siegel's father had actually died in a robbery, so Superman was a part of his fantasy to create someone who could have prevented fatalities like these with superpowers of speed, strength, and invulnerability. At first, the idea of Superman was actually rejected for 5 years, until DC Comics put him on the cover of Action Comics #1. Almost 1 million copies sold out, making him a national icon. By 1940, he had radio shows, action figures, dolls, and even a balloon in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. Although a fictional character, he was in the hearts of many, for he had come to America striving for that American dream, much like thousands of immigrants. And while I was inspired by his courage and strength, I didn't think his superpowers were the ones for me. I mean, I can barely run a mile or do a pull-up, so I moved on to the next most popular superhero, Batman. Created by Bob Kane, Batman was different. He had no superpowers. Rather, he mastered every form of martial arts in order to fight crime on the streets of Gotham City. The reason Batman was so appealing to his audience was the fact that any one of us could have been him with the right resources. In fact, Lenny Robinson, at the age of 51, does just that. He becomes a real-life Batman. Driving around in his Batmobile, he visits kids at hospitals, encouraging them to continue fighting their battles. And while driving in a Batmobile sounds pretty awesome, I had to retake my driver's permit 3 times. I mean, I wasn't even at the driving part yet, so I didn't think I should be speeding around and fighting crime. But while these heroes represented motivation and inspiration, there weren't entirely positive influences. During times of war, comics would depict villains and adversaries with stereotypical or discriminatory features. For example, during World War II, following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Japanese people were illustrated as yellow monkeys, resembling primitive apes with extremely squinted eyes. Furthermore, there were no superheroes of color until 1969. Stan Lee created the Black Panther. But almost 40 years after the rise of superheroes. Comics not only discriminated on race, but also on gender. Females were always depicted as subordinates to men. We were the sidekick, the chick who always had to be saved. Lois Lane was needing of a rescue in almost every issue of Superman. But the biggest problem was that these thousands of people reading comics were perpetuating this discriminatory mindset from the comic book world into their daily lives. Fortunately, as these comics reflected societal mindsets, barriers between gender and race were gradually falling. Stan Lee had created the X-Men during the Civil Rights Movement. The X-Men is a diverse group of mutants who had come together under the arm of Professor X. However, the main conflict occurs as humans were prejudiced against the mutants for being different. In fact, Stan Lee creates the X-Men to parallel the strong prejudice against African Americans prior to the Civil Rights Movement. He compares Professor X to Martin Luther King as a man trying to unite the people, and Magneto to Malcolm X as a character more vigilant in the fight for respect. And as these racial barriers were falling, gender discrimination was also decreasing. Females were developing their voices inside and out this fantastical world. Wonder Woman was the first feminist icon who didn't need a man by her side. Rather, she fought crime with her bulletproof bracelet and a magic lasso that forces people to say the truth. While many people scorned her costume as objectifying women, she was proving to young girls like us that we could not only look sexy and dashing, but kick butt at the same time. And all of these superheroes, much like Wonder Woman, had a similar attribute. They used their powers and abilities to help others and build a better community. I realized that I didn't need a mask or cape or a superpower to be a superhero. Because as a normal human being, I already have the power in my hands to help others. Anthony Sadler, Spencer Stone, and Alex Skarlatos used their power of invulnerability as they prevent a terrorist attack in Paris in August of 2015. These 3 American men, completely unarmed, stripped multiple weapons away from the terrorist, preventing a complete massacre. They risked their lives for the safety of strangers. Superheroes. Keisha Thomas uses her power of super strength as she protects a racist man from getting hurt. During a protest for racial equality, this African-American teenage girl used her body as a shield to protect a man discriminatory towards her own race. She risked her well-being for the safety of another. Superhero. Doc Henley uses his power to control water as he provides clean and safe drinking water to kids in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Peru. He uses his abilities to provide the basic necessities for others. Superhero. Narayan Krishnan uses his power to control fire as he cooks for mentally disabled and destitute people. After witnessing a man eat his own human waste out of hunger, Krishnan immediately quit his job as a chef and founded the Akshnaya Trust, which feeds mentally disabled people. Superhero. All of these normal human beings are much like our comic book superheroes, in which they take their powers and abilities to change the lives of other people. No mask, no cape, no power of super strength. Every one of us has the same ability as well. We can do it with simple actions such as saying hi to someone in the hall, giving someone a hug, or standing up for that kid being bullied. So, as Super Serena, I decided that I would embrace a power that I already have. My voice. But don't worry, Mom, it's not my singing voice. Now it's your turn to find your superpower. superpower.